The reason behind this series didn't start out all that spiritual. I think it actually started out by me coming to this sick realization about myself that there is something absolutely delicious about watching someone else bite it. Come on. You have watched those videos of someone crashing or wiping out or making a mess of something, and you've lolled. You've actually laughed out loud. You've done it. I know you have. When you watch someone, like a grown man, with a big hairy back, perched on a tricycle on the edge of his roof, there's something that draws you in. I don't know. And you ask yourself, at least I do, when they're doing this, what does he think is actually going to happen here? And then they do it, and they crash, and their body breaks in 14 pieces, and you think, what were they thinking? And we talk about how our children provide us a means to vicariously live out our dreams, our own failed lives. We get to watch them succeed where we haven't. There's something about vicariously failing through someone else too, because then they can get it out of the way for us, and we don't have to do all that failing for ourselves. And actually, the sad part is that when it comes to that "what were they thinking" question, everybody in this room, you've been asked that question at some point in your life. You and I both, we've made dumb decisions where somebody somewhere looked at us like we had four heads and said, "What were you thinking?" And in those moments, you have this choice, right, where you can try to justify what you tried to do, your own stupidity, or you can go, I don't know, I guess I wasn't thinking. Now, the cool thing, actually, about the Bible, and this is honestly one of my favorite parts about it, is that it's actually not just a collection of heroes and people who got it right. It's actually a record of a whole bunch of people getting it wrong in a row. Like, did you know that? It's a book of epic fails, and this God that loves us anyways and is pursuing us anyways, even though we mess up anything and everything he tries to give us. So there's this cool thing that I like to do when I'm reading through the Bible. I like to find those places where someone absolutely, totally bites it, and then do an autopsy of their failure. And that's what we're going to do in this series. Now, I'm going to introduce you to a guy named Solomon. How many of you have heard of Solomon? King Solomon. Some of you are like, "Is that a perfume?" I think I saw it at Shoppers Drug Mart. No, he was a king. He was a king in Israel in the Old Testament in the Bible. That's in somewhere in the first third if you don't read the Bible. And so he was the son of a guy named David. Now, David, he had his own share of epic fails in his life, but he was, at the end of his life, described as a man after God's own heart. So he was a guy that got a lot of things right and a couple of things really, really wrong. He was known for his passion for God and his passion for worshiping God and honoring God. He wrote a good chunk of the book of Psalms, which is poetry to God, like a prayer journal to God. And so David gave this incredible heritage to his son Solomon to inherit the kingdom from him. And Solomon, on the day of his coronation, or there pretty close to that, realized he had massive shoes to fill. That he was going to be this king of this nation, and he was freaking out. And God appeared to him in a dream and said, "Look, I have a coronation gift for you. I'm going to give you anything you ask me. Just name it." Now, God is not a genie, but this is one of these moments where he said, "Seriously, name it." And Solomon, after thinking about it, in this dream, which is weird, because in a dream, I'd probably ask for a life supply of Frosted Flakes or something. But in this dream, he was somehow conscious enough to ask God for wisdom. And he asked God for wisdom. It's like, there's no way I'm going to be able to manage all of this stuff without more wisdom than I currently possess. God's like, great prayer. And so he gave Solomon wisdom, but then on top of it, he gave him fame, and he gave him riches, and he gave him all kinds of crazy blessings. And so Solomon amassed this massive treasure. He started building stuff that became famous all over the world. He took 20 years or so to build this temple to his God that was so ornate and so beautiful that people would come just to see this temple. He had these gardens that he built that were just world-renowned for their beauty and their architecture. And so people would come from all over the known world just to pick his brain because he was so wise. And so this is a guy that, I guess if I'm doing the chart for you, everything's up and to the right for this guy. He's totally successful. He becomes more famous, more well-known than any king before him. There's peace in his entire reign with all the surrounding nations. He's successful by every single measure. But by the end of his life, he became what I would say is the biggest epic fail in the entire Bible. So also during his reign, he made alliances with these countries that he had come to peace with. Alliances which God had said, I don't want you touching those boys with a 10-foot pole. There's something wrong with those boys. So he was like, come on in. And he built alliances with them, and he let their religion creep into Israel. And he actually started worshiping false gods and idols and things that God had forbidden. He started marrying people from different religions and cultures. And that's like, woo! Because there's all kinds of people who believe things that he didn't believe, but he brought them in. By the end of his tenure, he had 800 wives. 800. 300 concubines. Live-in whores. This is not a guy who's got his head screwed on straight. So there's a bit of a hint. So by the end, so to build all the stuff that he built, he had to tax his people so heavily that they resented it, and he left all kinds of people poor in the wake. So yeah, his stuff is big and shiny. Everybody else isn't doing very well. And by the time he died, the nation was so fragile that with him out of the way, very quickly after that, a civil war erupted that ended up dividing the entire kingdom. And then that led to a downward spiral where those different parts of the kingdom were exiled into other nations as other nations like the Babylonians and Syrians invaded and leveled the place, razed Jerusalem to the ground, this beautiful city that he had built. And within a generation, it was destroyed. Like burning rubble destroyed. And that nation has never recovered fully from his folly. So here's a guy that had everything going for him. In the yearbook, in the Palestine yearbook, it would have said most likely to succeed, right under there, under his name. And then he looked like he had everything going for him, and by the end, boom, it's gone. So you gotta ask yourself, what went wrong with this guy? Now, the cool part, again, about the Bible is that it doesn't leave it to our imagination. We're not sitting here thousands of years later going, I wonder what went wrong. There's actually an entire book dedicated to showing us what went wrong. Now, the crazy part is that most Christians, and actually most pastors I know, don't look at that book that way. They think it's a book of wisdom, but it's not. It's a book of folly. It's a book called Ecclesiastes. I don't even know what that means. So you don't think that, wow, he's pretty smart. He even pronounced it right. I don't know what it means. But what I do know is that it's going to give us a lot of input on this front. It's an epic fail book, and it's going to show us how to suck less than we already do. I mean, not you, the person next to you. The titles of the books in the Bible aren't necessarily inspired, right? It's the actual content. But if I had a chance to title this book, I would title it Solomon's Meltdown. I would call it, or Solomon's Train Wreck, something like that. And I mean no disrespect by what I'm about to do, but I think it's important that we don't sugarcoat things, that we call a spade, otherwise we can't learn the lessons that we're supposed to learn. I think this book of Ecclesiastes has more in common with Keeping Up with the Kardashians than it does with the Book of Wisdom. When I read the next couple of verses, I guarantee you will not be disagreeing with me, okay? So what I want to do is actually frame this book of Ecclesiastes as the closest thing the Bible has to a reality TV show. Seriously, one that is not going well. One you watch week to week to watch just how depraved it's going to get. This is the book of Ecclesiastes. And so I just want you to picture this with me, okay? So the cameras are rolling. I know, thousands of years ago, they're very advanced back then. And the cameras are rolling, the lights, the camera, the crew, they've done all the makeup work and everything, and they're doing the countdown. 3, 2, 1, and we are live. And so there's a double set of gold doors, big, 11-foot doors, indoor. And they're about to, open these doors, and they hear a pounding. Open the door, and in this room, Solomon's inner chamber, there are pizza boxes strewn everywhere, beer cans all over the place. There's some sort of incense coming up from the corner. There's all kinds of weird stuff going. And Solomon's in the middle of the room, holding on to one of the pillars, going, pounding his head. And the cameraman's like, sire, we are live. You may want to. And he turns, and he's like, oh, that's okay. Let's just keep filming. This is I'm not kidding you. Look at this. Okay. And then he starts into it. The words is a teacher. The son of David is a king in Jerusalem. Meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Cut the feed, no, I'm the king. You just keep filming. We're gonna do this. I don't want to do this later. Excuse me. We're just like, he's just like, and here, look, I mean no disrespect, but honestly, those words are the conclusion that he draws for this entire book, and they appear nowhere else in the Bible. Nowhere else in the Bible do you hear a man of God saying everything is meaningless. You know why? Because he's wrong. This is not a book of wisdom. This is a book of folly. Now, watch how he continues. So the camera is still rolling. I'm not going to read it drunk. That's an awful lot of work. But I could, and I might slip into it. Look at this. So it's like, keep rolling. And he says, what do people gain from all their labors of which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets, and it hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north, and round it goes, ever returning on its course. And the streams, all streams, they flow into the sea. And yet the sea is never full. Some of you know that's the kind of thing you think about when you're smoking something. To the place where streams come from, and there they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough seeing, nor the ear, it's full of hearing. And what has been will be again, and what has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. Is there anything to which anyone can say, look, there's something new? No, it was here already. Long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow him. Again, those words are not echoed anywhere else. Like those, it's futile and no one's going to remember. In fact, we're remembering him, which he said wasn't going to happen. So he is not speaking inspired words right now. He's speaking the words of somebody who's lost it. Have you ever watched a movie that starts with the end? Like they show you the hero or the heroine curled up in a little ball and there's things exploding all around them, and then the narrator says, it's been a hard day. You'd like to know how we got here, wouldn't you? Well, I'll tell you. And then they rewind and then they show how you got here. That's what's going on in this book. So he starts off with this conclusion, everything's meaningless, and then the rest of the book shows you how he came to that conclusion. And we're going to do an autopsy of his fail. That's how we're going to learn from Solomon. So, here's the experiment. This is how it played out. He says, I, the teacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my mind to study and explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. What a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I've seen all the things that are done under the sun, and all of them are meaningless. All of them. A chasing after the wind. What's crooked can't be straightened. What's lacking can't be counted. And I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. And then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also madness and folly. That doesn't sound terribly smart. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. Is that what the Bible teaches? The more wisdom you have? See what I'm saying here? The more knowledge, the more grief. This is a guy who's lost it. In fact, he is actually, in moments when he wasn't smoking something, he wrote some very profound words in the Bible. Like, he actually was a huge part of writing the book of Proverbs. He compiled the book of Proverbs he found in the ancient world, and things his father had told him, things that God inspired him to write. And he compiled all of this under the direction of the Holy Spirit. And in this book of Proverbs, he wrote this. He said this: do you see a person wise in their own eyes? There's more hope for a fool than for them. Did you hear what he just said? I am the wisest. Like, he's saying, I am a fool. He doesn't see it, mind you, but by his own definition, he's a fool. He says, and I'm going to indulge in folly and madness and see if I can pull wisdom out of there. Well, you did right earlier. The mouth of a fool feeds on folly. Again, you're fitting the definition of a fool to a T. Now listen how this experiment goes. All right. Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom, and also madness and folly. What more can the king... Oh, sorry, I skipped ahead, sorry. Woo! It's like, that doesn't make sense at all. Okay, I said to myself, come now. I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. Does the Bible teach that you find out what's good by indulging in pleasure? Stupid. In fact, when Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, and the serpent, the devil, came to Eve, he tempted her with what looked like pleasure. He said that, and then her thought was, well, then it must be good. That was the essence of temptation. So what we have a clue here about is that Solomon, from the get-go, from the very beginning of this experiment, he's off his rocker already. Okay, but that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly. This is awesome. I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, so I got hammered. My mind still guiding me with wisdom. Aha. I wanted to see what was good for people to do in the heavens during the few days of their lives. It's like he's talking to his mother. I had an excuse, though, right? So here he keeps going. I undertook great projects by breaking the backs of my people and taxing them beyond belief. That's the subnote, right? I built houses, plural, for myself and planted vineyards. And then I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees. And then I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves, had other slaves who were born in my house. And I owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. And I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. And I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well. There's that whole 300 live-in hookers and 800 wives. And the delights of a man's heart. Look at this. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. And all this, my wisdom stayed with me. Okay, what would you think if I told you that the Lord had told me that I'm supposed to quit this job and move down into the States, move into Hugh Hefner's Playboy mansion for an entire year to study pleasure and sexuality from a clinical perspective? I'm glad you're laughing, because this is what he's proposing, people. Oh, no, I was still wise. I still didn't lose it. No, you were gone, pal. Look at that. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. Right, because that's what God wants us to do with our lives, right? My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for my toil. Yet, when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Then I turned my thoughts to wisdom and also madness and folly. He does it again. It's like, maybe I got to go around again. Maybe I missed something this time. Maybe I wasn't silly enough. What is he doing? And at the end, verse 17, he says, so I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless and chasing after the wind. I hated the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. Solomon also wrote these words in Proverbs 6:27. Can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? It's like this whole book is, let's find out. And then his wisdom that he pulls out of this entire experience kind of read like, here's the conclusion. Listen carefully. When you touch a hot element, it burns your finger. No, watch. Maybe if I do it longer, so weird. This is a book that illustrates, and he actually says this later in this book. He says, even as fools walk along the road, they lack sense and show everyone how stupid they are. Yup, they do. Thanks for Exhibit A. So here's the weird thing. In Proverbs, he himself wrote, stay away from a fool, for you will not find knowledge on their lips. So we have to be very careful when we try to pull wisdom out of a book. I'm not talking the Bible here, I'm talking Ecclesiastes, written by a guy who is not making sense. Where we will find it, and this is why it's in here still, is in the autopsy of his failure. The reason this book exists is so that we can watch somebody who is set up for success both by God, his family, the environment around him, and blew it. We get to watch how and why, and we have to learn. We have to learn. And his legacy proves that it was folly. He also wrote things like, a wise woman builds her house, but a foolish woman tears it down with her own hands. Yeah, that's you. You just did that. So, let's learn. Now, I know that I've been really hard on Solomon. I know that. And I actually have read a lot of things that he's written in the Old Testament. And all of this is inspired by God. In other words, God inspired us to this to be in here. He's inspired the writing of it, so that we can learn from it. I'm not saying that this is not God's word. You have to understand that. But it's there for a different reason. It's there for the same reason that we have stories of other people blowing it, so that we can learn from their failures. Now, I know I was hard on him, but he did at least admit that his experiment failed. He at least admitted that. And it's crazy how close to God his dad David was, how every heartbeat was beating with love for God. And in this book, did you notice, you're going, when is he going to talk about God? Right. Did you notice how little it comes up? This is a guy who's not living dialed in and connected. He does have statements throughout the book of Ecclesiastes where he kind of says, I think it has something to do with God. I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure it's to do with his judgment and all. And he did, come to this conclusion. You can't take it with you, right? Do you get it? Do you get it? You get it? Because she's trying to, okay. So, he did basically say, look, whatever you work for is going to be left to someone else. You can't take it with you. So good for him. But what I want to do, just really briefly, before I set the stage to set the stage for the next couple of weeks, is I want to talk about things we can learn from his failure, which is again what we're supposed to do, I think, with this book. So here's the first one. Sometimes our wisdom is just folly that we found a way to justify. Now you can see this in his life. He's calling this grand experiment, this adventure of wisdom, and it's nothing of the sort. He's taken folly and he's dressed it up like wisdom, but that doesn't make it wisdom. It's still stupid. He's officially the world's stupidest wise man. We can see it clear as day now as we read it today. But back then, he had taken all the stupid things he did, and he somehow put a spiritual spin on them to make himself look good and make it look like he was noble and he was doing some good work and philosophy. And really, he just lost his marbles. And he had to learn to name that. And so I want to encourage you that there may be something in your life that the people around you are going, that doesn't seem very smart. And you go, no, I thought this through. People are like, what are you thinking? And they're doing the same thing we're doing to Solomon. What was he thinking? They're saying this, but you found a way to spin it so that it makes sense for you. I want to give you an opportunity today to say, Jesus, is that wisdom trying to break into my folly? Because I might be on a track that's leading me towards death or destruction, and God's trying to help me out of that track, but I'm too busy focusing on justifying the stupidity of my life, right? I know this is harsh, but man, this is a harsh story. The second one, and here I would say, there's that quote from Lord of the Rings where Frodo says, it would seem like wisdom, but for the warning in my heart. Right? This seems like wisdom. I have found a way to justify it, but at the end of the day, I think I actually know that it's not. Right? And here's the second one. There's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. Here, right? Okay, so here, Solomon up here knew all the answers. He had access to divine wisdom. He had access to the wisdom of his father David, who lived a lot of life, made a lot of mistakes, had a lot of victories, and he had all of these advisors around him. He knew the answers up here, but somehow it wasn't translating into his actual life. Can you relate to that at all? Like, you know the right thing, but you end up doing the same dumb thing over and over. You're asking yourself, why do I keep doing that? At least acknowledging that there's a difference between knowing the answer and living the answer. That's huge. And I think Solomon seems blind to that. He seems to think just having it here means he's wise, even though his actions are dumb. So we need to be able to call a spade a spade. Okay. Third one. A wise person. This is huge. A wise person can learn from other people's mistakes without having to make this mistake themselves. I tell this to my kids all the time. You've got a classroom around you 24/7. You're watching people make stupid mistakes. And one of the things that wisdom does is it's able to watch people making mistakes and learn from those mistakes so you don't have to make the same mistake. Just imagine, look, I love Jesus, and I know Jesus, and I'm totally consumed by love for Jesus, but if you don't believe in Jesus, if this church thing is new to you, or you don't even know if the Bible's real or not, look, if you would just apply this principle, just watch people make mistakes around you, learn from their mistakes so you don't have to make them yourself, I guarantee your life will be better than it is now. Guaranteed. Right? Solomon was actually known for sitting at his window and watching people go by. So some of his proverbs read like this. I was at the window and I was watching this kid walk down the street, and he was a young guy and he seemed to have no sense. And then I watched this adulteress seduce him, and then he writes these incredible words about how this kid got seduced. And then he goes and proceeds and does the same thing himself. Right? He watches a sluggard or a lazy person, right? And he watches this guy sitting around all day, and he watches this guy's life slowly go downhill, and he draws conclusions about this guy's life, as he should, but somehow he can apply it to his own life. He ends up making the same mistakes that he can name in others, which you've never done, right? You're really good at watching how other people are off course and they're making dumb decisions, and you're really good at seeing in yourself, but actually learning from it so you don't make the same mistake. That's the real trick. And here is my fourth and final point. What we think we know can blind us to what we're still missing. So it was actually a huge part of Solomon's downfall that through this process of folly, exploring folly, he actually thought he was being smart. He thought he was being wise. And it was what he thought he knew that blinded him to the fact that he was actually way out of bounds. He couldn't see it because he was so convinced of his own intelligence and his own wisdom. It was Solomon who wrote, "Do not lean on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him." Acknowledge God, and he will make your paths straight or direct your paths. And here he is in this book doing nothing of the sort. He's going, no, I got this. I'm smart. I'm wise. You know what the real tragedy is, though? I mean, he did some stupid things, right? I mean, and in the case of his wives, he did it 799 more times. And then the concubines, and then, I mean, just make a list, like, of all the stupid stuff he did, and the stupid things he explored, when he should have known the answer before he started to explore it. The real tragedy isn't what Solomon explored. It's what he failed to explore. Did you notice? And if you read this book, you'll get it. In all of his search for meaning, he never explored what an intimate relationship with God would factor into that. Not once. He never explored how does community play into a sense of meaning. Family, community, fellowship. He never once explores, what about giving? What about generosity? Doesn't even occur to him. Not even on his radar. And he's completely blinded to his filter and by his filter. So what we're going to do in the next couple of weeks is we're going to explore some of those things that Solomon failed to explore. Because guess what? We forget too. I don't think there's anyone in this room that would say, oh yeah, community, useless. I'm just, in fact, don't talk to me. Yes, I need friendship, I need family. And yet, we put it on the back burner and we let it get destroyed by other things. We know generosity is, in fact, it doesn't even matter if you're a person of faith. You hear this all the time. Now, generosity is good for the soul, and Oprah says it. And yet, we keep our stuff like Solomon did, and we're not generous with it. Right? We know, I hope, maybe not all of us know, but many of us know that really what we're craving is an intimate relationship, a friendship with God, and it's through Jesus, and yet we spend all our time pursuing everything else but that. So maybe this epic failure has a lot to teach us after all. Let's pray.